September 2014. I'm just a road runner. I find myself in the Peak District. I had no idea what was about to happen, and we're off. 50 miles to go. Hello and welcome to the Fat Man to Ironman Coach Marshy running podcast. I am Neil Marsh and I'm here to talk to you about everything running. Welcome to today's episode 2. So it's still nice and new this for me. It's still nice and kind of fresh and out of my comfort zone. So just bear with me on this. But how are you? Are you well? How was your running week? Have you had a good week? I'm really looking forward to understanding what it is you guys are doing in your running journeys. So please get in contact with me on any of my platforms and let me know how your running is going and how your running week has been. I'm really excited to learn about all of you listeners out there. So for me, I am completely buzzing. I've managed to complete my first ultra marathon in 3 years, and that was last weekend up at Lady Bower. In the Peak District, and that's what we're going to talk to you today about, is running your first ultra marathon. However, what I'm about to talk to you about could be applied to most races when you reach that for your first time. So as you move up that running ladder, or even if you're just going for a 5k and that's all you ever want to achieve, the points made today will very much cover that kind of thing as well, in terms of it being your first go. But so running your first ultra, that's where I am. That's where I was last weekend. And that's where we spoke in the introduction just a minute or so ago. So September 2014, there I was up in the Peak District. And man, I had absolutely no idea what was just about to happen when I was about to take on the 50-mile ultra marathon. I was just a road runner. I'd done a marathon. I'd dabbled with some short distance and medium distance triathlon, and I thought I could do it, and I did do it. The point is I did get to the end, and I'm really happy that I did, but I did not know what was going to happen, and there were so many things that I wish I had known or researched prior to the actual event itself. But I got round, and it was an amazing experience. The Lady Bower Ultra Marathon, which is where I was last weekend. And I was really happy to say that I only took part in the 35 miler this time, but I was really pleased to get back into the ultra marathon world. And the event that I attended was absolutely brilliant. It was really well organized by Laura and John, the owners of the running company that organized that race. And bearing in mind the times that we're in, it was exceptional in terms of how they delivered their race and made it secure for everyone to participate and everyone around the event as well. So it was a great experience once again. But that first one, I'll touch on it as we go through, but very much it was an amazing place to run. That was the first thing I would say. Absolutely amazing scenery. Loved it. Obviously, when you go to a new level of running, you don't really know what's going to be in store. And I had 50 miles to run, back in 2014. So it's 50 miles and there was a cut-off time of 13 hours. Now, in your head, you can work that out and you can say, that's a long time. But actually, in reality, it wasn't. It took me 11 hours and 50 minutes to complete that 50-mile ultra, and it was an amazing scenery, but you found yourself becoming a little bit delusional due to things that I'm going to bring up in a second, and you found yourself really outside of that comfort zone. So when it comes to your first ultra, I'm going to talk you through some points. But the first thing I want to say, did I ever think I would make it to the ultra running scene? Absolutely no way. So you can also. And what I would say is if you don't think you can, but you want to, then you can. And it's just putting in place the right steps in order to make it to the right level. And you just do what you need to do, step by step, distance by distance by distance. And eventually you can do that too. If you have no desire, keep listening. You never know, you might pick up some things that will help you for the distances that you do want to run. But for me, anyone who wants to participate in the ultra marathon world, that you can do it, because I no way thought I could. And I ended up getting there. And now I participate and hopefully will continue to participate at a regular level and at a higher level as we go on. So I'll keep you in the loop with that. But so the ultra marathon world, what is it that I want to tell you? If you're running your first ultra and with any race of any distance, there are probably 3 main points as a minimum, which I would recommend that you definitely consider before you take on any ultra marathon. Those 3 points are as follows: the equipment, we're going to go through that in a second, the nutrition that you use, and also the pace where you're running and you're walking, and trying to understand that. So we're going to go through each one of those points with you to see what it was that I didn't get right, what I didn't know before I started that first ultra, and what I would say you need to kind of consider in order to do your ultra yourself when it comes to you running that distance and taking that step forward. So let's start with equipment, right? First of all, when it comes to your equipment, you need to know your race. So the first question you want to ask yourself is the route an A to B? So in other words, am I going from a point to a final point, which is X amount of miles down the road? And if that is the case, then you need to understand the equipment that you're going to use, that you will have with you from that first second. However, with the Lady Bower back in 2014 and last week in 2020, the Lady Bower is one of these ultras where you do a small 5-mile loop and then you do 1, 2, or 3 15-mile loops to create the 20, 35, or 50-mile distance that you're going to participate in. And the thing is that's a really good example to use, because something that I thought many people potentially got wrong, but I know that myself and another very experienced runner from my running club, Ian, got right, was that we had a bag that we, of course, were going to run with refueling, drinks, those snacks that we needed, which we'll get onto on point 2 in nutrition in a minute. However, what we did realize is we would happily run the first 5 miles without that bag. Now, that bag weighs 3 to 5 kilos probably, depending on how much water you're carrying. So to not run that first 5 miles for me as an individual was really important, because I didn't want to carry that extra weight, probably not in peak condition right now. So I didn't want to carry that extra weight, so I didn't. And Ian made the same decision. We just didn't see the point in getting out there and carrying that extra weight. And the race type, with it being a lap-based race, enabled us to make that decision. So knowing your race before you turned up. Now, if I compare that back to 2014, when I did the Lady Bower Ultra, I very much ran the whole race with a backpack on. And there was absolutely no need to do that, because I could go to the car in between races, in between laps, and I could grab that bag and then I could put it on for that second loop, because that first 5-mile loop, I didn't require that bag. So know your race and know your equipment and how you're going to carry that equipment. Okay. And especially when it comes to the consistency of those laps. So for the Lady Bower, for example, that was 5 and 15. For another ultra marathon, which I've taken part in, it was laps of 10. So you need to understand what you would need in order to cover 10 miles at a time on a 10-mile loop. Whereas an A to B ultra is very different. You're going to have that kit with you. And yes, there might be a bag drop down the road. That's very much the case at most ultras, where the organizers will provide a bag that will be put at X amount of miles for you later on. Great. That's cool. That allows you to replenish that bag and your stores that are with you. But you need to understand that. And that's really important to know beforehand. I didn't know that in 2014. And I would say, as simple as it might sound, from road running to ultra running, when you're doing half marathons regularly, you don't need to consider that. But you need to consider that with an ultra. Second thing on equipment, and last thing, is your shoes. Do you have to change your shoes? Have you ever been in a position where you've been in a race and you might have to change your shoes? Well, this was me on my second ultra marathon. Okay. So, idiot that I was, took one pair of shoes for a 70-mile race in August. So, what I didn't consider was, and didn't have enough experience with at the time, was that if my feet were to get really wet, I could be in trouble. And then what's more is I didn't change my socks either. So I ran the same race in the same mile after mile, lap after lap, 10-mile laps, that one, with the same pair of shoes and the same pair of socks. I didn't change my socks until lap 5. Well, by then it was too late. My feet were completely in a mess. I ended up in a medical tent, which I'll explain in a second. And quite frankly, my foot was described as trench foot. So the medical team obviously had seen things like it, but they hadn't really seen anything like that before. And that was because a complete lack of knowledge and lack of experience. And for me, just knowing that now, you know, I dropped out of that race. That was my DNF ultra marathon, did not finish. And I failed, to use a word, at 56 miles, ended up in the back of the medical van, back to the medical tent, hypothermia. Feet looked like something the medical team had never seen before. And quite frankly, I had no idea what I was really doing at that stage in terms of footwear and sock change. If I'm being totally honest, I did have hypothermia. And I remember when they got me back up to a good temperature that I went off to the toilet. And by the time I came back for a recheck, I was actually underneath again. And my body temperature was really low. So I think I was down as low as 34 at one point. So, you know, things that you don't know before you start. And if you had have known, that would have changed things. Now, I was cold. That could be to do with other bits of equipment, such as not wearing the right jacket. The rain jacket would have been good. But also, had my feet have been right, would I have continued to have finished the 4 remaining miles, 56? This is 10-mile loops. So 56 miles. If I'd have got those 4 miles back because my feet were able to hack it, I probably had enough time to refuel and get the 2 remaining laps in terms of the cutoff point. So just knowing your equipment is really, really important. And I couldn't stress that more. And that's why I put that first, because just those 2 points for me, had I have known that beforehand, it would have been completely different. So number 2, nutrition. Going to start this off by saying fuel early in the first 20 miles. Okay, so I don't want you to underestimate that. So for me, I didn't want to underestimate that. And I did in every ultra that I did in those first 3. However, something I've learned since, and very much with fueling, if you are going to deplete your carbohydrate stores in those first few hours of running, then you need to replenish that. But if you wait for that to go and then try to replenish it, you are continually playing a catch-up game, which you don't want to play. So in the first 20 miles, get your nutrition in. Second thing with nutrition, don't underestimate the importance of eating the right thing. So on that second ultra of mine, I was found myself there eating tins of tuna because I felt like I could run better off protein. I thought I would run using tins of tuna and protein shakes. And there was very much a lack of carbohydrates, and that's that whole fueling process again. So that was a big learn for me. At Lady Bower in the 50, I think I just struggled through it. Very much eating bananas back in 2014 and just really getting through it. But I could remember being quite delirious in 2014 at the Lady Bower 50 because I clearly hadn't eaten enough to get me through. So that last lap of 15 miles, I was really digging deep and really calling on all those reserves. And then I would say with that nutrition, know what your fixes are. So nutrition and running is a very individual thing. But if you know what those fixes are, that will make the difference. So, for example, for me, 2017, back at the Grim Reaper, the one where I ended up in a medical tent, and I knew realistically salt was an issue. And I'm not into these salt tablets. Maybe that would be easier if I was, but I hadn't quite learned that side of things. So I wondered what would work for me. And actually, I thought I'd try mini cheddars on this race. Pretty much I'd seen one of the elite runners from the race a few years previous do it with hula hoops. So he stashed them all over the course, whereas for me, I just had them at base. But I went for mini cheddars, and man, it worked. For me, it personally worked. And now mini cheddars can be an integral part of my race plan. Just a disclaimer here, there's no endorsement here from mini cheddars or McVitie's, but mini cheddars for me very much work as a fuel. So another thing with that is understand that the time is always ticking. The time is always ticking when it comes to your run. So although having a rest and a break is good and that's okay, can you consider the idea of keeping moving in the right direction while refueling? Because your time is continuing. Now, for me, ultra running's never really been about time, and it isn't for a lot of people I know. For some people, it will be. So all I'm saying is, if that clock is ticking and you need to refuel, why don't you refuel while walking in a certain direction? Because for me, that's something that I've massively learned. So that's nutrition, broad topic. We can talk more about that in the future, I'm sure. But broad topic, but just some things that I would consider massively on your first ultra. And then the third point is your pace and your kind of running versus your walking pattern. So you got to understand that in ultras, especially in certain distances that are over a certain amount, it's very unlikely that you're going to run every single step. In fact, I would say unless you're an elite runner, you are realistically not going to do that. You're not going to run every single step. And even the elites in certain races and in most races, the top races in the world, they will certainly not be running every single step. So you need to get over that. And in 2014, when I reached the Lady Bow, I had this thing in my head that I was going to run at a certain pace. It was never going to happen. But I didn't know that because I was just a road runner. So it's important that you understand that if you are going to take on your first ultra, manage those expectations really early. So let's talk hills. Hills are really interesting. In the ultramarathon world, there is a well-known fact that runners tend to walk up the inclines. At Lady Bower, in the Peak District, although it was a relatively flat race back in 2014 and again 2020, same route, there were hills. And I didn't know this, and neither did the people that I was running with. However, the people around us soon started to talk as we reached the first kind of incline, 3 miles into this 50 mile race. And that in itself was really handy, because if it was good enough for the fast runners to be walking up the hill, we certainly should as well. And it was about being a sponge and learning right there and then. So making sure you walk up the hills and the inclines is an important tactic, especially on that first one, because once you've depleted that energy, you are never going to get that back. So just bear that in mind. Something else to consider is knowing your ratios. So if you look at this, Google it, read books, there's lots on this about running to walk ratios. But for me, there are many different ratios that you could use, but you need to understand the difference between the ones that are going to realistically work for you and the ones that aren't. And when you time them ratios, so one that is known very commonly is to run for 5 minutes, walk for 1. But are you going to exclude the inclines in that running time? So let's say you were running and you met an incline that you needed to walk. Would you pause your watch in terms of the timer, bank it, get to the top, and then continue running for the rest of that ratio, and then have your walking set before you did another set? Now, running ratios are really interesting and something that I don't want to go into too much depth in right here. So it's definitely worth a little research for you before you do your first ultra. Something that, again, I didn't really understand in 2014. Something that I'm getting to learn now, sort of 6 years later. But something that I found last weekend on the 35 is that I came up with a ratio idea of my own. And what I did is I did it because I thought it won't only help me physically get through those miles, but actually mentally, it'll give me something to focus on. And I'm really pleased to report that it worked really well for me. It was a 46-minute period of time, but it worked. And those miles chewed up during that time. And I was focused on what I was doing. It took my mind off the pain. It took my mind off what was going on around me. Still chatting to the other runners, of course, but it was great. It was absolutely brilliant. So what I did is I did a 5 run, 1 minute walk, 2 sets. Then a 4 with 1 minute walk, 2 sets. 3, 1 minute walk, 2 sets. 2, 1 minute walk, 2 sets, and 1 and 1, 2 sets. And then I repeated that twice. And believe it or not, when I implemented that ratio, my average speed went up. It was in the last sort of 7 miles, 8 miles of the race. So it almost getting through 2 sets of that got me to the end. And it kept me focused and it took my mind off everything and it completely worked for me. And I was so happy that it did. So when we talk about ratios, is that one scientifically proven? No. Are any of these ratios scientifically proven? There will be some out there that are. But a lot of it is to do with getting through, running, rest, running, recover. Physiologically, there's science to suggest that that will work. Giving your body that little bit of a break, it works. And for me, that 46-minute period really worked. So definitely understand your ratios before you start, but don't overcomplicate it. It might be really simple, something to help you mentally get through it. So when running your first ultra, what is it as a minimum that you need to consider? You need to consider that equipment and how you need to carry it. You need to consider the nutrition that is in that equipment that you're carrying. And you need to consider your possible strategies and ratios around how you're going to do it. If you do those 3 things before you run your first ultra, you will have a way better experience than I did. Because those 3 things alone, had I have known a little bit more prior to that, I'd have had a much more successful race and I would have enjoyed it much more. So they're the things that you need to know, the 3 things. What equipment, what nutrition, and what strategy do you have? What I want you to take away from this, if you are listening to this and you're not an ultra runner, but you want to be, who wants that? Who is listening right now and would like to be an ultra marathoner? Because if you are, what I want you or anyone to take away from this right now is simple. You can train up to an ultra, whatever level you're at. You just need to make those small steps from where you are now to that next level, whatever that next level up is, and the one after, and the one after that. And eventually you will be ready to listen to this podcast again and run your first ultra. Just take that away with you today. Believe in yourself. You can do it. So hopefully we're all a little bit more clear now on a few ideas around running your first ultra. If you did enjoy this podcast, please be sure to head over to the YouTube channel for all your running tips, advice, and the training and strength training around running. If you want to learn more about my journey, there's plenty more on the YouTube channel as well, but it's all there, the foam rolling, the strength and conditioning, and the mobility for runners. Please don't forget at the end to give us a little star rating and a review of this episode. It will be really appreciated. And make sure to share this with anyone who you think might be interested in listening to this podcast or listening to the future episodes. It'd be really appreciated if you could share that, and do feedback to me and let me know how you're getting on with your running journey. I'm really excited to hear how some of you are doing and how your journeys are going from wherever you started all the way up to where you are now and what your future goals are. So I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope we can meet here again next week to discuss a little bit more on the Fat Man to Ironman Coach Marshy running podcast.